are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me once again is the one and only Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Eagle-eyed viewers and, eagle-eared listeners might notice my voice is a little bit scratchy, but the reason for that is because I was in St. Louis on Thursday night, and I got to watch the Flyers break a 13-game road losing streak. Right, and that's kind of the big story is that streak breaks, and it's Thursday night, and I happen to be in the building. So,
I'm guessing, judging by that, we'll keep it shorter this week, just to
we're going to be keeping it shorter this week.
Rest your voice a little bit. I mean, listen, I said last week when we did Monday, right after the deadline was over, pretty much. I mean, by the time we came on and recorded our show, I had already gone on air for ESPN. I had gone,
you had a big day.
I had another podcast I was on before that on OMB. So, I think I talked for 3 hours straight once we were done our portion.
Yeah, I get to leave this and go to work where I talk all day. So I'm facing something similar today.
And not only that, but so I finished that up, and then Tuesday was right away. Let's start the road trip. They're on a 5-game road trip. Let's start the road trip and play another game. And now it's going to be different because all these people are not here. It's going to be one of those things. So it's pretty funny stuff. But
and that's kind of one thing I did want to mention is that for the rest of the season, and if you've been listening for a while, you know that we generally talk a little more in depth about the games. The rest of the season's not going to have quite as much of that. We're still going to be watching. I'm going to be watching as much as I can around work and et cetera. And, Kevin's still going to be going to games and covering for 97.3 ESPN and Sports Talk Philly. Make sure to follow everyone over there at Sports Talk PHL at Philadelphia. So we're still going to be watching, but it's just depressing to talk about loss after loss after loss, and we expect to see quite a lot of them here.
Well, I'm curious to see how, there really hasn't been a chance to kind of see the post reaction to, pretty much the most recent game in memory. Now, I was at the game on Sunday before the deadline, but pretty much the most recent game in memory was Claude Giroux's 1000th on, that Thursday night before the deadline. And obviously the building was pretty well packed and it was done well and all that stuff. But they played that one game, and now they are on this road trip that spans almost 2 weeks. So by the time they come back, and it's April already, and there's only 7 games left. I mean, I'm not sitting here telling you I expect bad crowds for some of them. You got to look at who they're playing to and know that you're going to get some visiting fans in the building. Toronto's one of the teams. The Rangers are one of the teams. Pittsburgh's one of the teams. You're going to get
teams that travel well.
You're going to get that. But I also look and immediately one of the things that comes to mind is, they have 5 home games left after the first week of April, let's call it. And I don't know, for all the times, and I'm not trying to bring another sport into the picture here, but for all the times we don't focus on all that type of stuff on the show, I definitely put some focus. I mean, let's put it this way, I'm part of a radio station that does everything, so I do have some knowledge of things.
Well, and we can shout out the fact that the reason the Flyers are on a road trip is because the Elite Eight is in Philly, and we can give Nova a little shout out here.
Well, yeah, but that wasn't even where I was going with.
No, I know.
By the time I think it's roughly April 8th rolls around. I mean, first of all, April 8th, you've got Philly's opening day.
Okay.
Which, to be honest, the fact that lockout didn't last.
The fact that that's happening at all.
Well, yes, it is. That's already a miracle to begin with, but the fact that it came back in the timing that it did, that you didn't lose all of April, because I was sitting here basically ready to think, outside of maybe a Sixers playoff run for basketball, there wasn't a whole lot that was going to be going on, and this was what you had, and you were going to it really was going to test the way that we talked about games in February, hey, this is really going to test who's paying attention, who's not, or who cares anymore, and that's not to fault people who don't. It was more of a hey, listen, we could see some really bad crowds, and there's nothing else happening. So
and there's no way around it. You're gonna have bad lineups.
Quite literally, second game of the baseball season, I'm driving into Wells Fargo Center that night behind the game. I'll be showing up probably within an hour after the baseball game starts.
Right.
To get there for a 7:30 game, and it's I think it might be the only time all year I compete with a crowd because obviously there's not a whole lot going on in April.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's that's going to be there. And the Sixers regular season wraps, I think, on the 9th or 10th also. And then you're okay, playoff mode for them. And there's only, by the time that happens, they're only working around 3 dates with the center anyway, so it won't be a big deal.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
all
it'll
that
get switched over to hardwood pretty early, and it'll stay that way for a while.
That's going to be a day now that I think about it, because I think the Sixers play on the 9th too. And so
Okay.
the Flyers are at 7:30. The Sixers were listed as to be determined, which the
Means
only
it's going to be a day game here.
pretty much it's going to be a day game. And, well, not unless the only thing they can do is they could try to get the Flyers to switch out and be the early game.
Maybe.
Say, hey, listen, you guys come in at 1 or even 12:30. Because it's a 7:30 start for whatever reason, probably because of the Sixers. That's probably the only reason it would be delayed that far.
Unless it's a national game?
I don't think it is. It's only against Anaheim. So I don't believe it's a national game. It's just, I think it just has to do usually that half hour is just a window for the building. It's just gives them a little extra cushion. But most people it makes me laugh whenever, like, you remember that game, the Eagles game that happened down the stretch of the Eagles season that literally directly competed with a Saturday night Flyer game, and nobody really showed up to the Flyers game anyway, but nonetheless, it was one of the days where you're like, hey, listen, all these people competing with, like, it was funny because it was like something that people hadn't experienced in 2 years.
Right.
So if people hadn't experienced that in 2 years, wait until you've got, hey, basketball's probably down there in the afternoon, or it's hockey. It doesn't matter. One of the two will be down there in the afternoon. One of the two will be down there at 7:30 at night, probably. And the Phillies are playing at 4.
To be fair, though, even all of that doesn't compare to an Eagles tailgate. Just the mass of people that come out for a football tailgate is a whole different animal.
No, it does not. That's true, but it's just one of those things where it's like that's almost a blast from the past that we haven't experienced in a long time.
Yeah, that's one of those underrated. That's one of those underrated signs that things are getting back to normal.
Well, yeah, but
where you look at it and go, "Oh, that's a lot of people there all day."
Right. It's quite literally one of the only games left that I have to really plan and navigate what time I want to try to be on my way there. And
everything else you expect to roll up whenever and not really have to deal with a whole lot of traffic.
Well, let's see. I got a Tuesday night before everything kicks in. They're obviously the only ticket in town that night. So, all right, that's fine. The Wednesday game that they have against the Rangers is the Phillies play in the afternoon, so that's long since over by the time you're ready to move forward and go. 2 Sunday afternoons at odd times when nothing else is in the city, and a Friday night.
Yep.
Everything else is on the road.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of games left at the Wells Fargo Center. And speaking of, I finally experienced a building that wasn't the Wells Fargo Center, and I'd been to a couple other buildings. I'd been to Console or whatever it's called in Pittsburgh, PPG Paints, whatever, the Igloo.
No, that's a different building.
Oh, that's the old building. Right.
Building. No, but it was funny because the reason you're making me laugh bringing this up because there's a YouTube channel that I watch that I'll shout out on here for sure because we've actually mentioned the channel before when we talked about jerseys before, and I've shouted out this channel, Post to Post.
Okay.
He's doing something right now where he combines like 3 hobbies into one, which is he's doing a video now where he is traveling to all of the NHL arenas on Flight Sim.
Okay.
He's doing a series of these things or whatever. And what he's doing with this is that because he likes gaming a little bit, I think he likes planes and all that type of stuff, and the idea of travel, and that might be the love is like travel. And then obviously he's a hockey fan. And he's already said he's going to do this with all the other leagues too whenever he's done with all the NHL places. He actually just did Philly the other day, and it was one of his favorite ones to do because of the fact that what he's looking for is how much can I find in a video game?
Right.
How much branding can I find? Like, do I get a team logo on the side of the building kind of thing? And
the Wells Fargo Center is great for that.
Well, yes, but sometimes the games wipe that stuff out because of whatever reason. Because he's passed by buildings that I'm sure have more to distinguish who who plays there that aren't showing up in this game. He does the video for Pittsburgh. What he did the Pittsburgh video before the Philly video because he's just gone by division. He's kind of just randomizing it and then generalizing the area. He does the Pittsburgh video, finds the arena, And the arena still says it's this must be how old the maps in this game are. It still says Console Energy Center on it.
That's funny. They're old then because it's been
I mean,
several years that
in
it's been
fairness,
PPG.
and he didn't know what year it was because he's literally trying to read it off of the poster that was on the side of the building. But on the side of the Wells Fargo Center, it still had banners for the 2014 draft. So that's how old the map. And that's not the game. I think the game pulls maps from one of the search engines from like years ago. So that's
At least it's not the Wachovia Center.
Well, right. Like you've got stuff like that. In one case, he went to go search for certain buildings. Like he goes, obviously, like he did the Islanders, and he goes, okay, I'm going to try to find all three. Obviously, the new one's not there because it's so recent. But
right, fair enough.
But I'm going to see if I can find like the lot where it is, and he finds the racetrack that's right off of it, and he goes, okay, look at this area of trees back here. They probably cleared that out. That's where it is.
Right.
Okay, cool. You got that down. He goes to check for like
Nassau.
He goes to check for Barclays Center and finds
Okay.
that, and it was not much branding on it. Other than it did say Barclays on it, but didn't have much.
Right.
He goes to find Nassau, and Nassau he finds it, but Nassau looked like this tiny little thing that like came like in terms of a rendering in a map came like an inch and a half off the ground.
Okay.
And these other buildings are coming off, and they're like a foot off the ground in this scaling that they're doing to show you it and whatever. Like it looked way more realistic in terms of size. This looked like nothing was there.
That's funny.
It was really funny, and because you hear him sitting there, like, and it's funny. He's doing these, and he's getting very disappointed about like ones where he can't find branding, or he can't, or it's not like one of them he flew over, and it's like, what was it? It's not there or something. Oh, Buffalo, I think it was. Like, there's nothing there. Like it's there, but it's like this little two-dimensional box, so you can't even really see the arena.
Okay, that's funny.
And he's like sitting here going like, what? Like this is very disappointing. It's pretty funny stuff because he's got a lot of stuff that's like he's got a lot of different branches for the type of stuff he posts. It's kind of a fun respite from like a channel that does straight up hockey talk. Like, hey,
right.
I'm going to talk about whatever. He does it on rare occasion, but you know.
Yeah, post to post seems cool, and maybe at some point we'll reach out and see if invite him on the show.
I don't know if he does a lot of that type of stuff. His collaborations are much more. Like his collaborations are much more, hey, people send me stuff and I'll review it. Like he does a lot of jersey concept videos. He does a lot of things like that. He's much more of a jersey content kind of guy than anything else. But nonetheless, I mean, we could find multiple channels that we could pull from down the line. There's a lot.
So real quick, since you mentioned jerseys, we don't have to spend a ton of time on it. What's your opinion on the reversible Toronto jersey?
I didn't hate the one that they actually wore in game.
The Toronto Maple Leaf side of it thing?
Right. Like, I actually think that's I don't like the way that the logo looked on the front in terms of, like, it looked like it was almost, like, cut into pieces, I guess is the best way to put it. But I didn't think that the idea of having a solid black jersey with blue striping and the blue logo on the front, I didn't hate that, to be honest. It was very outdoor game of them, kind of, in a way.
It kind of reminded me.
But it was cool. It
kind of reminded me of the jerseys from the All-Star game a couple years ago.
In St. Louis, I think, or
yeah,
the ones with the music notes on them,
right? Which is like the plain horizontal stripes through the middle, yeah,
right? Because it was supposed to represent a musical staff, and yeah, like that's musician talk coming out for me, but nonetheless,
I understand.
But that was a cool concept because everybody had the same kind of thing going. It was either all black with like gray stripes, or it was white with gray stripes going through it. Kind of.
Right, and I'll be honest, I didn't love those as All-Star Game jerseys because I think All-Star Game jerseys should kind of be bright and colorful and like a big flashy advertisement for your game. But as an alternate jersey, kind of inspired off of that, I did like what the Leafs did, and I think it looked really good. You
know what I did like about those All-Star Game jerseys, as opposed to this year's or a lot of other years? There's an element of it that I like, that they blended everything together to the same color scheme while putting the team logo for the player on the front.
Okay.
Like, it's still a good representation of the player without necessarily changing up. Like, when you're wearing two distinct colors, you still know what team you're on.
Right, for sure.
So it's not like they all had to just wear the NHL logo on the front. Now, I'm not saying that I would take that away, because that makes a lot of sense. I actually didn't hate this year's versions of that, to be honest. This year's versions was very World North America again.
Yeah,
which I
and I
kind of
dug
like.
that.
Color scheme wise, it was very that, and I am a fan of that. So actually, you know what? It was that. It was the days of the fantasy draft with like team. I mean, the first year they did it was what, Team Chara and Team Alfredson or something like that. It was something crazy like that back in the day.
I remember, man, that to me, that's my ideal format. Fantasy draft all-star game is my ideal format.
Yeah, because you like it because of the fact that that like much like the NBA is doing right now, there's some ribbing involved to who gets picked when, which is always a fun thing because you want personalities to come through.
Exactly.
And then you mix up players like that you don't see commonly. Like the idea that you could get, just for example, from this past year, that you could get a Johnny Gaudreau playing with a Claude Giroux because they're not in the same division, not in the same conference, but drafted to the same team.
Ovi begging to get picked last. I need a car. Don't pick me.
Right, but even down to something like, because like Ovi and Crosby would play on the same team, conference wise or division wise.
Right.
But what if you got an Ovi McDavid situation or a Crosby McDavid situation? It's like it's everything that you want to see in either the Olympics or in the World Cup kind of stuff.
Right,
and like, how you get it. Like you be able to get in an all-star game at 3-on-3.
I was going to say, for the record, I like the 3-on-3 format. Keep the 3-on-3. Keep doing the exact same tournament you're doing because I like that. Just fantasy draft your rosters, man. Just throw all the players in a pool, especially if you're going to do it in a place like Vegas.
Would you Would you keep the format also the way that it is in the sense that the 3-on-3 is fun, but I don't think you can't just do 2 teams of 3-on-3 constantly. You're going to have a game that's like 25 to 23.
4 teams.
Right.
No, still 4 teams. Still do the tournament.
Drafted.
I want 4 captains.
That's great. I think that's a good idea.
That's even better. You're going to have trades. You're going to have shenanigans. You get to put an event on. Well, we had a trade. What was it? They traded. God, it wasn't Subban for Weber, right? Somebody did a trade, and it was a meme of a trade. I remember that it was a meme of a trade, and I think it involved Tyler Seguin, but I can't remember exactly what happened. But you're going to have stuff like that. And with 4 people, that's just twice as much capability for shenanigans. Come on. You can't tell me that a 2-hour production, or even a 1-hour production, however long it's going to be, of a fantasy draft with 4 NHL captains.
Yeah.
And even if you want to go 1 from each division, just because that's a nice, easy setup.
Well, sure. Like you do the same thing you did this year where it was, obviously circumstances changes, but it would have been what? Ovi, McDavid, trying to figure out who else had captaincy, if you will. Like Giroux ended up as the captain because Ovi wasn't there, but Ovi was the captain.
Right.
McDavid was definitely it. Who would have been in the Central? Was it Kane?
Might have been.
It might, or did Kane even participate? Now that I'm thinking about it,
I can't remember, to be honest with you.
Brinkett was in it for Chicago. I remember that, but I'm trying to.
The All-Star game feels like it was 6 months ago.
It really does. I don't remember any of this stuff anymore. One of the Atlantic would have been somebody from one of the top teams. It would have either been probably a Boston guy. It could have been one of those types of guys. It was. Or it might have been Matthews in the Atlantic because
okay,
yeah. So Matthews, so you get there you go. So you're taking part of that away because you get Matthews, McDavid, Crosby, or Ovechkin, and then pick a guy from the Central. Oh, the Central probably would have been McKinnon.
Okay,
there you go,
but
like somebody like that, McKinnon, and get those 4 superstars and say you pick your team.
You're 3 people on the ice. Let's just throw this out. It could be McDavid, Kaprizov, Hedman.
Ooh. That's fun.
Come on. Come on.
Kaprizov scored another goal late last night, too. Which
I know he did. He is
something else to watch.
He is sensational.
All right, do we get back to this road trip?
Yeah, I think we get back to this road trip and specifically this game against the St. Louis Blues because it's the only game I really care to talk about in detail because it was my first game in over 2 years.
Well, I'm gonna try to get us into the St. Louis one really quickly by just brief recap of the other 2 because there's not much to talk about.
God, we do have to mention the Detroit game, don't we?
Well, the Detroit game, I don't want to just dismiss. Like, first of all, it's a game where the score looks worse than what it was because it scored 2 empty net goals at the end, which I certainly don't understand at all what the strategy was at the end of that. The
first goalie pull was bad.
It was awful.
It was just executed supremely poorly, and it seemed like the guys on the ice didn't know the goalie was out.
I'm thoroughly convinced the Flyers tie that game, not late in the third, but they tie that game if they don't give up the 4th goal at the end of the second period.
Okay.
If it's 3-2 going to the third, the way that they started to play throughout the third, especially, I'm convinced they would have tied that game up and it would have been possibly an overtime situation.
I agree.
But, and I give them credit for kind of clawing their way back at that point, because when they give up the third one and it's now 3-0, I mean, the first period was just awful, and it was really not a surprise at all. And then the third one, okay, the third one was probably the one that made a lot of people start to tune out, because the second period wasn't starting any differently. And, like Joel Farabee scores right away after that, and you go, oh, okay, Joel Farabee scored. That's cool. And then they get another one, and it's like early enough. Like, it's still before the halfway point of regulation, and you're like, oh, well, 3-2, okay. And they pushed for most of the rest of the second period until late, and that's when they give up the one that I kind of figured was the dagger. And that was pretty much all she wrote on that one. I mean, they were in the game. They got the third one to make it a 1-goal game again, and then the goalie pull was just terrible. So they really didn't have, it's one of those games when they play a team like Detroit and you see how much young talent they have. Detroit's on their way, because Detroit will, at some point, with Lucas Raymond, with Moritz Seider, with Zadina, with the way Vranis playing right now after coming back from his injury. They've got enough good young pieces that eventually somebody's going to take notice of how close they are and be like, hey, you want me to put you over the top? I'll put you over the top. And some free agent's going to go in there at some point. I don't know which one, but somebody's going to decide, hey, you know what? I can do something here.
By the way, I just wanted to mention it. It feels like it's been a while since we played Detroit, and I didn't notice him too much in the last game. Moritz Seider is good.
Seider didn't have the best game against the Flyers the second time around. The first time when they came to Philly, he was outstanding.
Right.
But then he played them again over the weekend. I don't think he was as... He might. Well, I think he was noticeable enough, though. He scored the game winner that day, I think.
Yeah, he was very good. Like, I think he had a game below his standards for the season he has been having, and he still looked spectacular.
Yeah. So
he's starting to look He's starting to look a whole lot like everything we wanted Sam Morin to be.
I don't know about that, because I feel like they're two different players. I think he's what everybody wanted Shane Gostisbehere to be, because he can defend better.
Man, but
he's got some offensive skill set.
He's also big, man.
He is big. I'm not taking that away from him. He's big.
He's got that big German tank musculature.
When you think about the way that Gostisbehere was advertised as a skater coming in, and then watch him skate, it's everything that they wanted, in all of the other areas. Because he's not just Gostisbehere became a kind of a one-trick pony.
Yep.
Offensively, with, hey, it's just get it back for the
clapper from the top.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just he's gonna unload. And defensively, you knew what kind of player he was. Seider's a better defender, and Seider's got more versatility as an offensive defenseman, because he's doing it in so many different ways. He's got some skill moves to his game. He scored a game winner against the Flyers earlier this year because he just let go a wrist shot through a screen.
Yeah.
That's it. It's nothing
complex.
He
is a spectacular talent.
Yeah, he really is. And I like Lucas Raymond a lot out of that group. I knew that was a good fit for them when they drafted him. That's not a shock. But everything else about, that team as an up-and-coming team, they've got guys who are veterans who are perfect for them.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think Vran is still young enough that you don't even have to, he's a veteran, but you don't have to look at him as a guy who's got no future. I think
he was on that Washington Cup team, right?
Yeah.
He's got that experience? Okay.
Yeah. I think that, I think a guy like Sam Gagner is perfect for them.
Absolutely.
So perfect for them in this situation. And even defensively, you get a young guy like Seider in there, and you're going, hey, you know who's going to play next to you? Danny DeKeyser.
Yep.
And you go yeah, is DeKeyser a great defenseman? No, he's not. He's not great. He's perfectly adequate at this stage of his career. But you've got more coming from a youth standpoint, and you can go out there and probably spend some money down the line.
I can't wait for 3 or 4 more years. The Red Wings get real good again and start clashing with the Colorado Avalanche again, while being run by Joe Sakic and Steve Yzerman.
Oh.
Come on! Tell me you don't love that.
There's a lot of teams that are hopefully going to put themselves in that position that I think that might be a good way to finish off the show, is once we get past a couple of these things, is to talk about where the playoffs stand right now and who we're starting to look forward to seeing. Because
we can touch on that towards the end of the show for sure, because we are going to focus. I mentioned earlier in the show that we're not really going to talk a whole lot about the on-ice game-to-game results out of the Flyers, and we're going to start generalizing that kind of stuff a little bit. And I think we're definitely going to turn our attention towards the playoff race a little bit, because at the end of the day, Kevin, you and I are both hockey fans, and when Flyers hockey stops, that doesn't mean hockey's over. So
no, we're going to still be invested in it.
We'll definitely be covering the playoffs here on the show.
So I guess let me briefly speak. You already mentioned Colorado, so I'll briefly gloss over that game.
Yeah,
which was I think the words I used on Twitter were over before it started. I mean, how early they didn't give up a goal until 7:20 in. Kadri scored, and then actually what people don't remember is it was tied. Van Riemsdyk scored to tie it up in the first period, and that was 13 minutes in. So you're down to the final 7 minutes of the first period, and it's a 1-1 game, and it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. They're actually still in, like, they're getting outplayed, but they're still in the game.
They're technically still in it, right?
Like, it's tied. And Makar scored a power play goal right after, and then Comfer scored, and then Rantanen scored, and Comfer and Rantanen both scored in that period off of Flyer sticks.
Yep.
So it was that kind of game, like Nick.
Not a whole lot Martin Jones could do about it.
Well, no, that was Hart that night.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right.
Jones got to start in St. Louis.
Started in St. Louis, yeah.
But it's going off Nick Seeler. Like, it was. It was funny. It was the exact kind of game, and there was a change because Oscar Lindblom didn't play in St. Louis, came back from Colorado, and Travis Konechny played in St. Louis and then
played really well
on Friday, while dealing with a little bit of an injury. So there's guys banged up that they didn't play. And when you keep taking out, they've played 3 games this week, all of them with 11 forwards, 7 defensemen. And when you take out guys like that forward-wise, even if Lindblom has had like a year where you're like, hey, listen, he's not the player that he was like 2 years ago when he was really getting hot right before everything. But I'm sorry. I look at that defensive group of 7 and go, what did you expect?
Why have 7 of these people earned a spot in the lineup?
No, I don't say that because the fact that I sit there and I go, okay, like Sanheim Ristolainen is a regular pairing. I can't take that away.
Sure.
And I'm not
for better or worse.
And I'm not minding Provorov York.
I like Provorov York.
I think York getting some big time is important.
I think it's very important.
Bottom 3 of that group, because now it's not even bottom pairing, and you're going,
you're
rotating Yandel, Sealer, and Connaughton. Down to
they really are just jumping through hoops to keep Keith Yandel in the lineup, huh?
No, I don't think they're jumping through hoops at all. I think it's what they have.
Okay.
Even Zamula was hurt this weekend again, so he wasn't in the lineup for some reason. So until they can bring him up for good, you're not going to see anything different. Like, embrace the fact that York is getting legit playing time, and the rest are going to be there. It's just the way it's going to be. But that whole first period, Kadri's goal is through a screen. Who's screening the goalie? Nick Seeler. The second goal is a power play goal. So, no, are those guys on the ice? They are not. But the guy in the penalty box was Connaughton.
Right.
He took the penalty. And then one off of Sealer's stick, one off of Yandel's stick into the net. And that's all there is.
That's all she wrote, right.
But that's 4 goals right off the bat out of 6 that they end up scoring in the game. But 4 out of 6 right away that you go, well, those defensemen are the ones on the ice or involved in it in some way. Like, you're giving one of the best power plays in the game time because of a penalty by one of those players. And then 3 other times they score because something involving that player is a part of this thing in one way or another. And it was one of those nights. That's how they play. But still, like, it's frustrating to watch when you go, this is the best they can put on the ice right now against a team like that. Like, well, I don't want to hear next season. I don't want to hear any of those 3 names.
No.
And if any of those 3 names are back in some
Chuck
capacity,
should be fired.
Well, he will be anyway, probably. But that's beside the point.
So one thing that these lineup deficiencies have caused, in the addition of Sean Couturier still not being back and Scott Lawton being out injured, is that we saw some of this week. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, I just popped up a banner. Joel Farabee played some center this week. Yeah. And this isn't something we've seen a lot out of him in his career. I don't really think he played a whole lot of wing at a center at lower levels either. But he looks okay.
He was kind of listed as both coming up towards his draft year. I think
one of those things where the best player just tends to play in the middle
not
at lower levels.
Not necessarily. I think he just had experience at both, kind of going through it, and then once he
Okay.
was really on the development team, he was
A winger.
more of a winger at that point. But it's always been there. I like Farabee's the type of guy who I don't know if it's documented all that much, but he's the type of guy who post practice will go and do some face-offs probably.
I believe
Just-
that.
Just to
Just to
experiment.
keep it sharp. Just to keep it
Hey,
fresh,
listen,
learn new things.
like Farabee, kind of like Konechny, is a guy who you're not afraid to put in the face-off circle if you need to. Like if your guy gets kicked out,
Somebody's got to go take it.
right. You shouldn't fear him being in the face-off circle. I don't know that center is a natural position for him, but you don't fear it.
I'll be honest, I haven't seen him win a whole lot of draws.
The one game he was at least 50%.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, noticing, I made a point to kind of watch it Thursday while I was there. It seemed
Thursday
like
he did not have a good day with it.
It seemed like he lost a whole lot of draws, but that team does have Ryan O'Reilly, so that that accounts for something.
Against Detroit, he was 42.9. Now, granted, the team as a whole is losing more than 50%. Like you take Claude Giroux off the team, you're
and
going to
Sean
lose.
Couturier too.
Well, yeah,
Essentially.
He
two of the top 3 or 4 in the NHL every single year, often the top 2.
Do you know what I think is happening with his face-off percentage, if I'm honest? He's coming out and in certain games starting off really strong. And maybe it's as the game gets a little bit more out of hand, and that's when it's like, because that's I remember seeing games where he's was at least at 50%, like in the first period, halfway through the game, like whatever.
Well,
and
maybe
as these games get out of hand,
Well, and maybe it's one of those things where there's a bit of a leveling game to the face-off, like how you actually go about it. Maybe guys are just figuring out his tendencies, and later in the game you're winning more
especially
face-offs.
if you haven't done it,
Right, especially if you're not as experienced with it.
Like you're right. Like when he's playing Colorado, where he's playing St. Louis, you've got O'Reilly on the other side, you've got McKinnon on the other side. Like these guys could take you to school. He is playing as the top line guy, kind of.
Right.
Theoretically speaking, so you're not exactly getting a relief of guys you're facing in face-offs to start with. He probably would be winning more if he was doing it like third line.
Probably if he got some better matchups and not going against Ryan O'Reilly.
But let's go into that, because first of all, we had a little bit of a side discussion about this whole topic, because I'm of the thought process of why not.
Sure.
Why not, and B, I think the player expresses an interest. How can I help even further? I mean,
Okay.
Here's the thing with Joel Farabee. You've got a guy who sure looks like, for being a pretty humble type of guy, as it would appear, because there was a whole big thing when Giroux played his 1,000th that Giroux had said, "Oh, this is a guy who's going to break my records," and Farabee's very much a come on, like no, don't do
relax,
that.
Right?
Like or whatever. And he's been one of their best since, as is kind of expected, because he's been one of the best players on the team for the last 2 years. But he's continuing to do a bunch of different things. Like his game is very rounded right now.
It's evolving.
In terms of he's obviously not, like, he's still scoring, he's still setting guys up, he's still showing off good skating ability. But now he's playing center. He's playing a different position defensively to an extent. He's taking face-offs. He's fighting people.
He's willing to fight people, even if the linesman won't let him.
Well, and then he did later on. He did in the Colorado game.
I gotcha. I just
right. Like I'm saying,
man, I'm sitting there in the building, and I think I'm gonna watch Joel Farabee drop the gloves, and all of a sudden the linesman's diving in there, and I'm standing up screaming, just so you know.
Oh, right. But either way, like it was, he's doing a lot of things where it's like he's willing to be that guy, and I know maybe one of the questions, and we don't have a banner for it, but it's okay, because one of the questions that comes up a lot is who's the next captain of the team, and I'm not saying Joel Farabee is. There isn't one for the rest of this year.
You know what? I was gonna bring this up. Are you surprised if Joel Farabee's wearing an A next year?
That I might not be as surprised about.
Like, I think it's too early to put the C on him. I'm not gonna,
No, I think first of all, and this is why they won't name one for the rest of this year. You got to see who even makes it.
Yep.
Like, to be honest, I don't even know if you can sit there and I'm not trying to sit here and say like some of the obvious shouldn't be on there. Like, listen, you could sit there and just as easily say, he's not playing for the rest of the year, which makes it a little bit different. But you could easily just say, Sean Couturier, you're it.
I have a feeling that's the answer. And this is all, of course, assuming Claude Giroux doesn't sign back, which we've talked ad nauseum about.
You're right. But
and we're not going to get into it. But assuming he doesn't, because that's the most likely option. Of the guys you have here, I think Sean Couturier is the easy answer.
It's definitely the easy answer. Now, I don't know if it's going to be the right answer. I see other candidates that are veteran type players. Like I said, I think Scott Lawton's well liked, so I think he's a dark horse. I think another more obvious choice, not as obvious as Couturier, but an obvious choice is the way that Cam Atkinson is as a veteran.
Okay.
That you could very easily go there.
And he did pick up the A immediately upon Claude Giroux leaving.
Well, he did for now. I don't know.
Sure.
Well,
sure.
no, because I'm saying Lawton was wearing it for a little while and he's not playing. And
Couturier is not there.
Couturier is not there.
There's flexibility in the captaincy group. I understand that, but the fact that Claude Giroux left and then the next game Cam Atkinson was wearing an A.
Oh, exactly. So those are things right now for me that I'm like, they won't name one for the rest of the year because why bother?
Nor should they.
And I think the whole case of that right now is who's even here next year. And I don't even mean and I definitely don't mean it from the sense of, oh, well, you don't know if Claude Giroux's coming back or not. I don't mean it from that. I mean,
how aggressive is this retool?
Pretty much, but not just how aggressive is the retool, how aggressive is everything? How much changes again on the roster where you're like, hey, listen, because I feel safe in talking about the three names that I just brought up pretty easily because I don't think they're going anywhere.
I agree.
But you've got either other veteran guys or other, I'll call them younger veterans because they've been here for a while, but they're not old players by any stretch. Like
the Provorovs and the
we've had the discussion.
And...
Is Ivan Provorov going to be here next year? Is he a possible off-season trade?
Is Travis Konechny going to be here next year? Is Travis Sanheim going to be here next year? There's a lot of that middle.
I did answer a lot of these questions on O&B, by the way, and I think the Sanheim one is the easiest one to answer. I think he's here.
Okay.
And I say that because of the fact that you don't sign Ristolainen into the deal you just did with everything being, hey, I like playing with Sanheim, and then trade Sanheim.
Fair.
After a month and a half more of games.
And by the way, I do want to say that playing next to Rasmus Ristolainen, Travis Sanheim has looked a lot more confident in terms of taking the puck and pushing the rush.
Yeah, when he wants to, and
when he
needs to continue.
Yeah, I agree. I think he is good at it. I think when he is doing it and doing it with confidence, it is supreme benefit to the team.
It definitely is, and he's done enough. I mean, listen, I think it was the Detroit game, if I'm not mistaken. Ristolainen had an awful game.
It was the Detroit game. He basically pushed Carter Hart into the net on the first goal, and then I think he deflected the second one in.
Yeah.
Rasmus Ristolainen had a tough night. He
was a -3 pretty quick, I think, or something of that sort. I don't think it was a straight up minus. Maybe it wasn't a straight up minus, but you get the point.
It was not good.
They did bounce back in St. Louis. They had that pairing had a good game. A lot of them had good games in St. Louis. To be honest, it was a surprisingly good game.
They knew I was there.
Yeah, I guess that means you got to really start traveling, don't you?
Listen, if the team wants to pay for my accommodations, I will happily follow the team on the road.
I mean, you saw what happened when they went to Colorado and they play, post recording this, they're playing Nashville. Nashville can definitely, I think Nashville now, if you take away Justin Braun, Claude Giroux, Derek Brassard, who all were involved in that game a couple weeks ago. And Giroux didn't even play his best that night. Giroux was probably thinking 20,000 things.
Yeah.
With what was going to happen down the road. He wanted one in the first period or two. And then in the third period, it was almost like, hey, listen, they're in this game. Everybody else is finding a way to win it. And he's like, I kind of just want this moment to be, to an extent, I want this moment to be over because I know, I'm almost dreading this part of it. It's the wave goodbye. I know what's going. He didn't want any part of the ice after.
They dragged him onto the ice.
Well, no, he didn't want any part of the ice in that last minute and he said as much because he's like, it was starting to get emotional, and I'm like, I don't even know if I want to be out there for something like that at this moment.
Fair enough.
They're trying to win a game. I don't know if I'm going to help. I'm I'm feeling everything.
Nashville's taking this way more competitively than me at the moment. He was soaking it all in.
So are his own teammates. His teammates, and you're going, hey, we want to win this game for him. And he's standing on the bench don't put me out there. Don't put that on me. I'm not in a mindset right now to finish this game off. I know what I'm doing in 60 seconds here, But that's a really good Nashville's a really good team, and I'd wonder, this might allow us to start shifting gears to a couple things around the league, but
yeah.
Well, we're still talking about the St. Louis game a little bit, but because I want your opinion, because you looked like you had a good vantage point for a lot of what happened. I mean, you were down the end where they scored.
I saw
4 times.
I saw 6 of the 7 goals in that game.
Well, that's right. Okay,
The Flyers won 5-2, and 6 of them went into the net down the end I was sitting.
But you had let's see, you had the Konechny goal in the first period came right at you, pretty much. I mean, he was shooting right in your.
I saw the angle perfectly. I think I knew it was in, maybe not before him, but I knew it was in before the scorers did.
Okay.
Like he just came down at the perfect angle, and he circles from,
because they shot down. They shot down your end first and third, so that would be Konechny scoring the goal. Whatever was in the third period. So Hayden Hodgson scored his first NHL goal. That's a great
in
story
his first NHL game.
The guy who played, they popped it up on the screen the other night against Colorado. They did, because this was a nationally streamed game,
right?
You know, but they do this. They put this game on the like ESPN Plus, Hulu type stuff. So locally, when they came back for Friday, they highlighted the fact that now Hodgson was playing again in his second game. And he's played for 6 ECHL teams in his career before getting to this point. Like he played
and spent 5 years in the ECHL.
Right.
Like he's 26 years old and spent 5 years in the ECHL.
You're at a spot where you're like, I'm going to do this for the video because it's the only way I can describe it. Like, but you are this close to giving the whole thing up.
Yep.
That's how close you are to being done with the game and, hey, I'm out of it.
And you know the whole story, right? He got cut by a skate in a game.
Yes, I did see that story. I mean, I got to give credit to the guy who really covers him throughout most of the year. And like Tony Androkidis is that.
Yep.
I like that guy.
But he got cut by a skate a couple years ago, 7 inches wide and 3 inches deep. That skate was in his leg.
That story, or like the story was written like over the course of the week because he got called up. That happened like 2 weeks before everything shut down, right?
Yep, it severed muscles in his leg.
Like he has a devastating injury, and that's how he spent the start of all the COVID stuff.
Of the pandemic, right? He was I believe he was in the hospital for several days. I don't know if it was right when COVID started, if he was already home
close.
at that point.
I don't remember the exact. I'd have to go back and look up the story.
It was probably at the point where hospitals were nervous about COVID, and he was there getting treatment for a leg injury.
Right,
and it's
crazy
that here he is 2+ years later. With 2 points in one game, 2 points in his first NHL game. There
have been some unusual goal scorers over the course of the week in general.
Yes, very strange. Even including in that St. Louis game on Thursday, like Patrick Brown scored a goal.
Yes, like okay,
what?
So nothing crazy unusual in the Detroit game. Farabee, Lindblom, Van Riemsdyk. I mean, and listen. I see the comments all the time because there's a lot of people who throw out there, oh, there's JVR scoring it like when it doesn't matter. And it's like, I get it. Like, we don't need to be told every single time.
The JVR story is coming to an end. They're either going to ship him to an Arizona or somebody like that, or they're going to buy him out.
I already said that.
You've called buyout a number of times.
I've called buyout because I think it's the only option, and it's not really the only option.
Don't think it's the only option because Arizona needs bodies.
They do, but I don't know if they're going to go for that one. They might go for somebody else.
They need to get to the cap floor.
I know, but they'll find. Believe me, they'll find a way.
Have you looked at Arizona's cap friendly? They only have like 6 players signed for next year.
They'll still find a way to get there. Like,
man,
they're gonna take.
How are you
gonna? These.
How are you gonna sign people to play in a building of 3,200 people? And you're on the road till December.
Well, no, they're not going to sign. They're going to make these kind of trades. They're going to trade. They're going to trade all the draft capital for.
If you're Chuck Fletcher, you better be calling Arizona.
All right. So Konechny had 2, Patrick Brown scored, Hodgson scored, and then Farabee got the empty netter, which Farabee was desperately trying to get to James Van Riemsdyk, and then finally just was like, all right, fine, I'll make the move and shoot. And he shrugged afterwards, which was funny.
I read that as him being a good teammate. He comes down, he sees the open net, and I see him do a quick scan. Is Travis Konechny on the ice? Because if Travis Konechny's on the ice, he's got 2, and I'm hitting him.
Sure.
That's what I saw. He looks off JVR, no problem, no big deal. But I saw that
he looked at JVR afterwards and shrugged like, I tried.
Sorry. No, I saw that as a Travis Konechny check because when a guy's got 2 goals and the net's empty, you got to be looking for him, right?
By the way, I got to mention somebody else or 2 other players in the last couple of games.
Yeah.
That did not score goals at all.
Okay.
but that have started to pile up some points. Kevin Hayes looks healthier.
Kevin Hayes looks healthier.
And
Yep.
What did he have? He had at least 2 assists in St. Louis because he had a really strong game there.
He had a good game. He played a lot in St. Louis, too.
Like,
they went on that power play right away, and he was on the ice for almost that whole power play.
Yeah. And then how about Cam York? 2 assists in St. Louis as well.
Man, Cam York.
And the 1 assist was a stretch pass.
Yep. I don't want to.
He eventually got the goal, but
I'm going to try to pump the brakes here and not overblow this too much. Cam York looks good. He looks like a legitimate NHL piece at this point.
You needed him to emerge, and this is the time for him to emerge. And there's 2 things. I wouldn't be sending him back, which theoretically speaking they can't because they've already burned. Like Hodgson's up right now on an emergency call-up.
Okay.
So it doesn't burn one of the 4 that you have post-deadline.
Okay.
They sent York and Willman down to the minors on deadline day
to get them eligible for the playoffs.
Right. Which it's becoming more and more of a pipe dream for
the Phantoms.
But I do think the Phantoms have like at least a week's worth, maybe a little more of games beyond the NHL season. That you could also send them back and go like, hey, when your season's over,
get a couple more games in.
You can
if
still
you want.
Come back and maybe play a couple more games at that level if you're in a spot where you can, obviously, like if you're not even like the slightest bit recovering from something, but
and for a guy like Cam York, if you can get him those games, if he's healthy enough to play in those games, that's a good thing.
Right. But obviously, at this point, like you're not going to use an immediate call up on one of those players and then say, "Oh, by the way, we're sending you down."
Right.
Like they are here for the last whatever's left now. I think it's down to 15 or something like that. It's
17 or 18. It's too many games.
It's too, but because it's 2 more. It's tonight and then Tuesday, and then for whatever reason, one of these rare 3-day breaks.
Yep.
That you don't have any explanation for whatsoever. I mean, listen, I'll take it, but it's one of those rare 3-day breaks. And then they're back home, and then it's kind of, believe it or not, I think once they get back home to start April, there's a lot of back-to-backs. Like, they play a back-to-back next weekend. They play a back-to-back the week after. They play a back-to-back the weekend after. And I think they still have one more beyond that. That's also a home away. It's
that really home weird. And home weekend with Buffalo, that's going to be an ugly weekend of hockey.
Gee, thanks.
It's going to be an ugly weekend of hockey.
The only thing I guess that I feel positive about with that is at least the Saturday night game is on the road, so I get to be here,
right?
Instead of worrying about I guess the other positive too is that for a Sunday afternoon, like for a Sunday home game, 5:00 is a lot better than 7.
Yeah, you're right.
There's one of them somewhere in here, and I'm trying to remember. No, okay, it's not a Sunday, but okay, I think it was the Islander game though. Doing the Islander game, which I think was a 7:00 on a Sunday night. Or no, the Islander game was at 2. What am I saying? It was the week before. It was the Montreal game. Was a 7:00 night. Like doing a game at 7:00 at night on a Sunday isn't fun. It just kind of feels weird.
Yeah.
Like 2:00 was great. 5:00 is going to be okay. It's a little rough, but it's not,
And the week after that, Pittsburgh at 4:00.
4. I love the season ending on a Friday at 7.
Yep. Yeah, they definitely did that so we can bury locker clean out day Saturday morning.
Right, I was gonna say, but there's nothing better than like, hey, listen, we're just gonna do this on Saturday morning. That's everybody else, and then you could theoretically on Sunday do the same thing with like management and stuff like that. Hey, here's the coach, here's management, and end your whole thing, and then you go into kind of a hibernation for a while because, I mean, do they have like? We'll go into this in the coming weeks, but they're like free agency, like not, I don't want to say free agency, but like re-signing UFAs and RFAs is not going to be a huge deal for this team because they've taken care of a lot of them.
Yep.
Like the only drama you might have in that regard is if you wanted to, like,
how much does Keith Yandel make next year?
No, it's not that. But if you wanted to establish if you wanted to build around Sanheim and jump the gun on that deal with 1 year left, you could explore it. I'm not saying they're going to, but that's like the one that you could, like they did, like think about how last season they did this with Couturier, they did this with Farabee, so that they were already ahead of the game with them. They could do that with a guy like Sanheim. The rest I'm not sure about. Like everybody else, like what are you gonna do? Like with Zach McEwen, who also scored a goal this week, by the way. But Zach, what are you gonna do with Zach McEwen? Like you wait that one out until you get really close, and you give him like that near. If you bring him back, you give him the $1 million deal.
If so much depends over this summer on what direction they go. If Chuck Fletcher's fired and they bring in somebody who actually wants to start a rebuild, the whole conversation about the summer completely changes. Because what we're kind of expecting is Chuck Fletcher to still be in charge and the team to be, quote, aggressively retooling. I know it's a term we've used a lot here, and it's because it's the term they used.
Right.
And a lot of these decisions vary drastically depending on what happens there. And I'm a firm believer, by the way, that if you're going to fire Chuck Fletcher, it has to be sometime between now and the end of the season. If you get into the offseason and let him start talking to free agents, let him start thinking about drafting people, let him start blah, 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 then you can't fire him. Or, I mean, you can, but why? There's no coherent plan at that point.
You want to know what's going to happen because it's just par for the course?
He's going to stay and they're going to aggressively retool and be aggressively medium next year?
Okay, here's what's going to happen. This is just the way. This is no like I'm not sitting here telling you this is exactly what's going to happen. This is a gut feeling because of the fact that this is the way things go for this franchise. What they should have done is when you make the coaching change and don't really get any improvement from it to the point where, okay, your losing streak hits what it was for a couple of games and then you start winning again in December and then it all fizzles out and you go on a 13-game losing streak instead of a 10.
Yeah, they flashed up Mike Yo's record on this national broadcast. He's like 7-22.
You had every reason to make that change right then and there and say, all right, for at least the rest of this season, this is what we are. We're going to have that kind of trade deadline, and I need the guy who's going to build the team next year to start doing it this year. Like, that's the guy who makes the trade calls. They didn't do that, obviously, because Chuck Fletcher has handled everything since.
I would have liked to see that. Well, and that's why I think we're going to end up...
Yeah, Chuck Fletcher's not going anywhere at the end of the season, and he's going to handle this offseason. What's going to end up happening is that when they are not really good next year also, because of it, they'll get to a point probably right around Thanksgiving, maybe December-ish, and they'll go, all right, look at what the record is. And I'm going to throw out a hypothetical number at a quarter mark. Let's say they are 7-12-6.
Okay.
Something ridiculous. I'm not sure that's even realistic, but you know what I mean. They've played something like 20, 25 games, and that's what the record is. They're going to go, all right, that's it. See ya.
And then next year's chalk.
And what they're going to do by doing that is try to save face. Look, we moved on from the guy who hasn't gotten it done. What they like right now, in my opinion, is that he'll do whatever they want him to do in terms of which is where it's why what bothers me about when Dave Scott gets up there and says blank checks, I'm writing blank checks. Yeah, so guess what the guy who gets the blank checks is going to do? He's going to spend them.
Yep.
He's going to go and do whatever he thinks is the right thing to do to make the team better immediately because your answer to the problem is I'll just throw money at it. When you're not taking the steps to develop, to draft, to do in the back of my mind, I know people criticize Chuck Fletcher as a general manager. I'm not trying to say what he's done is good, but I don't think that he's dumb either. I think that he has said in the past hints, or at least given hints to, I know the best way to build it.
Right.
And it's countered by, but I can write a blank check for you.
To his credit, I just took a look real quick because I wasn't positive. I was pretty sure Joel Farabee had signed his extension. That extension looks pretty tidy at this point. 6 years, $5 million for
depending on his
potentially your best forward.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think Chuck Fletcher should have the reins of this team. I don't think he should have had them at the deadline. I certainly don't think he should have them going into the offseason. But it certainly looks like that's kind of where we're at, and it doesn't look like that's going to change.
Think about what you allow him to do as the general manager, if you will. Whether he's making he's calling all of the shots or not, which I don't believe he is. I think this is a group effort.
I understand.
But I believe he's the guy who's theoretically calling the shots. He's the guy who's going to get up in front of the media more often than everybody else who's involved in the process. As such, he's the guy who you are linking everything to make what could be like this is why people freak out about the Claude Giroux trade, because that's supposed to be a franchise-altering decision. You're trading a captain, a leader of the team, a guy who played 1,000 games here. You're ending one chapter and opening up a new book almost.
Oh yeah,
and that was like what you got back while having no leverage, and I understand that. He's still the guy at the forefront because his name's attached to it. He announces these things. He's the name on the press releases. He's the guy. He's the guy who gets on, interviewed.
He signed the deal. He signed off on the deal. He made the handshake. Whatever the terminology is.
I don't like the way that was phrased because he's not the only one who signs off on trades.
I understand, but at the end of the day, he's the figurehead on it.
Right. He's the name who gets credit because of the fact, or lack thereof.
Right.
Like because of the fact that his name, like when a press release, he's on it. Not to say that like Dave Scott was on a press release too about Giroux, but that's beside the point. He's just a figure who comes in and gives a statement because he wouldn't make a statement like Dave Scott's name isn't on a press release for the trade of Justin Braun.
Oh, right. Or Derek Brassard.
Right. It's on the release for Claude Giroux because you're talking about 1,000 games.
Well, right. And you even mentioned it, the end of an era, right? All the signage in the building with Claude Giroux's face on it was coming down. Like,
yeah.
Dramatically changes the whole entire face of your franchise.
So when you have that happen, not even just when you have that happen, but so Chuck Fletcher's the name that's attached to it. He's going to be the name that's attached to everything with it. Then he's attached to these potentially franchise-altering trades, which you're hoping you go and get something that makes a difference. He's also the guy who's attached to the decision to an extent, or a bigger extent than maybe it should be, of who coaches the team next year.
Yep.
Which so what happens? Think about what happens if you fire him mid-season after he hires another coach.
Yep. Then that coach is probably gone too.
I don't know about that because of the fact that somewhere down the line you might have an agreement in place where you're like, let's put it this way, they have to tread lightly on the coaching decision anyway if they don't keep Yo.
It's going to be John Tortorella.
I don't know if they can do that, to be honest. And I'll tell you why I don't know if they can do that, because of the fact that John Tortorella is another big name coach who demands big money. You are paying $10 million to Alain Vigneault over the next 2 years. That, listen, if you want to listen to everybody who says blank checks and do that, be my guest. It would be, it could either be a disaster or it could be great for people who are in my shoes.
I was going to say, tell me it wouldn't be fun from a media perspective.
Because we'll always have something. You're right. But I don't know how they go anywhere with that decision. I think I'm going to go back to, I don't remember if I said this name. I probably did. I guarantee I did on a previous episode back in December when we were talking about all this stuff. But I'm sorry. If you want me to get behind a name right now today, I'm getting behind David Quinn.
Okay. I like David Quinn.
I'm getting behind a guy who does not give you crazy high expectations. I'm getting behind a guy who is more of a placeholder.
Right.
That to be honest, you don't have to pay him a lot of money, not to the level of some of these other coaches. You don't have to worry about paying off what you still owe to Alain Vigneault for firing him.
Right.
And you can be, I don't want to say in 3 years you're going to be great. But you can do something where you go, hey, you know what? In 3 years, it'll be time again. And I know people don't want to hear, hey, there's another coach coming in. But then maybe you are in that spot where you go, all right, it's go time. Or maybe David Quinn's a good enough coach this time around that you don't feel that need.
I personally would like to see Travis Green, former coach of the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, and I don't hate that name as a guy who I think could be a developmental type coach.
The problem is it's going to be Rick Tocchet.
I don't think it is, actually. The more that I keep hearing stuff, the more I don't think it is at all.
I think we'll see, and I think something that I've talked about in this show for a very long time about who the true decision makers are on this team, and it's something we've kind of discussed ad nauseum here. If Bob Clark and Paul Holmgren have their way, I'd be surprised if Rick Tocchet wasn't a finalist. Even if they don't end up hiring him, I wouldn't be surprised if they interview him and are deep into talks and blah, blah, blah. Man, you know what? Between extending Rasmus Ristolainen for 5 more years at $5 million and hiring Rick Tocchet as your coach, we're doing a great job getting that tank going.
I mean, they are and they're not, because beating St. Louis is not exactly helping your cause either.
No, but it was fun, and I'll take it because I was there.
I know.
All right.
I mean, when you look when Ottawa's not winning games and New Jersey's not winning games, like you need as much like right now should be really
You're right.
Well, right now should be in a way really be tank time because of the fact that like you're playing teams that you should just be losing. Like you can't get much better than a game like the Detroit game where you go you're in it. You got like you went down 3-0, you clawed your way back in it. You're down 3-2, you're down 4-3. You look like you could have a shot. Nah, never mind.
Right.
And it's perfect that way. Like you kind of want to be mildly competitive. You want to come out of it with positives for like, hey, this guy played well. This guy had a solid game. This guy made a nice play, did this well. You want all of those things to show that you have something, but you also get to do it potentially without winning. And both things help your case. So before we get out of here, as we go to maybe some other stuff around the league, we obviously want to get to this.
Yeah, let's. So Claude Giroux has made his debut with the Panthers. It happened Thursday night, the same night I was in St. Louis. I did not get a chance to watch that game. But walking towards the Enterprise Center, getting ready to go in for warm-ups, I look at my phone and saw that Claude Giroux had an assist on their first goal of the game.
Okay, so I cannot stress enough to you how much because I watched the first period because the game was an hour before the Flyers were on.
If I wasn't going to the game in St. Louis, I would have been watching it also, for sure.
Well, I do. So I have something I'm going to say about this whole thing after the fact down the line, but I'll start with the first game because everybody, listen, there's nothing wrong with having all eyes on him in his first game outside of a Flyers uniform.
Sure.
In 15 years,
it looked weird, man.
It did look weird. Well, everything looked weird. I turned around. I even said in the midst of all of the other stuff I did podcast wise, writing wise, like before we recorded on last week, on which we did a day late on Monday because of the deadline. I wrote up his introductory press conference and then saved all the Chuck Fletcher stuff for the next day because all of it kind of came out right. Like he didn't get to talk until close to 6, and then I was recording all night. I just didn't really have time to put it all together until the evening, and it was like, okay, by now I'm just going to put it out in the morning. Right. And that was the end of that. But it was weird to even do that article and go, here's a screen capture from the a video of him wearing a Panthers hat. And like, you're going, okay, that's already weird. The jersey and full uniform was weird, but you couldn't get much more of a perfect first 35 seconds for Claude Giroux than the team takes a penalty, whatever number of seconds in. Giroux goes out there for the penalty kill because he can win faceoffs. He's probably not even out there to kill the whole penalty. He's probably out there again just to win the faceoff and get a clear and then get to the bench.
Right, we saw him do that here for a long time.
And Montreal scored 8 seconds into the power play, and like. Everybody jumped all over that with how nice of the Florida Panthers to welcome Claude Giroux by having a penalty kill that resembled everything he got in Philadelphia.
Yeah, you're really making the guy feel at home.
Right. Like, how nice of them to make him feel at home. And then 8 seconds later, off of that, they scored their first goal of the game. Giroux got an assist because he won the faceoff pretty much.
Hey, who else got an assist on that goal?
Oh, Robert Haig.
Right. So the Florida Panthers, by the way, if you're looking for a bandwagon team heading into the playoffs and you're a Flyers fan and things are kind of falling off the rails here, you might have already been leaning towards the Florida Panthers just because they got Claude Giroux. Well, they also have several other former Flyers, including Robert Hagg, Radko Gudas, and longtime Flyers legend Sergei Bobrovsky.
I cannot stress enough how much this is becoming Flyers South. If the LA Kings used to be
Flyers West,
you've got Flyers South now.
Man, why couldn't Florida trade for Jeff Carter?
I don't know. But either way, so Giroux has the assist on that goal. He got an assist later in the game too. So I believe he ended up with 2 points in that debut. I have to check because I think there was some people who said something about one was going to be taken away somewhere or something. He still had 2 assists, and then I believe he had 2 assists again in game 2. On Saturday when they played Ottawa.
Did. He's got 4 assists in 2 games, which is
no
just
goals.
Very Claude Giroux. It's a very Claude Giroux stat line, 4 assists.
Okay, now I do want to voice something, and I have no problems doing this we'll do this down the road because I'm sure we're going to do this all the time. I have no problem if people want to make this their team because he's on it and you want him to win.
It is an acceptable bandwagon option for sure.
I just don't need. Here's what it is. I will be able to see what he's doing because I see what most of the scores are every night. I really don't need I'm not going to, and I hope that other people who do what I do aren't going to spend every single night for the rest of the year updating what he's done when it's not relevant to the game at all. Like,
I don't mind if he's putting up points. If you wanna, if you wanna tweet out, oh, Giroux got an assist on this. Like, I don't love it. I wouldn't personally do it, but I don't have a problem with it. Like, he's the most interesting thing to follow for the rest of the season for a lot of Flyers fans.
Right, but you're gonna have 2 months to do that, hopefully, if all goes well. And I said at meeting, when their season's over at the end of April, you can go full Claude Giroux watch. Go,
and I have a feeling a lot of Philly outlets will.
Right, and I'm prepared to do the same thing. Like, when we're talking playoffs, when I'm not tweeting about the Flyers specifically because there's nothing happening, then yes, I will be all over a bunch of situations, because I will be all over, hey, you know what? Justin Braun gave 3 years here, and the Rangers are doing this in the playoffs.
I think you should make goal graphics for Claude Giroux, Robert Hagg, Radko Gudas.
You're lucky I have a goal graphic made for Owen Tippett.
Did you have a Hayden Hodgson one?
No, because first of all, and I'll tell you why, actually, it's a good reason. Usually the picture that I put with it is from a home game, and he hasn't played a home game yet, obviously. Not to mention the fact that I had nothing. I don't even have a preseason game with the guy wearing a jersey to sit there and say, hey, listen, I'll grab something from that.
He's never worn a Flyers jersey before.
Pretty much. I mean, the guy had never worn a Flyers jersey up until Thursday, and then happened to score in it. So, like, I'm not. You
got caught out a little bit there. No, there's no shame in that.
Actually, and this is why I don't even have something prepared with that. Even when Jerry Mayhew was scoring goals, I grabbed his headshot at least and used that.
By the way, he scored for the Anaheim Ducks on Saturday night.
I know, right? So I don't even have a headshot because he's so newly signed to the team in general with a standard contract that they didn't even have a preseason headshot of him.
That's really funny.
Like, at least with Mayhew, there was. Like, okay, yeah, before the season started, regardless of whether anybody thought he was going to be up here or not, he did take a headshot.
He was in the organization, right?
Because he's in the organization, exactly.
They knew there was a chance, but okay. So,
but I just hope that that's not like every single night because Florida's playing on the same night that the Flyers are, or vice versa, or whatever.
Right. Well, we did kind of mention the rest of the season and the playoffs and stuff like that. So, real quick, just kind of glancing through, I'm going to read off these playoff matchups, and we're not going to go super deep in on them right now, but I just want you to highlight one matchup you're looking at. So, if the season ended today, Florida would play Florida would play Washington, Boston would play Tampa, Carolina would play Toronto, Pittsburgh would play the Rangers, Colorado would play Vegas, Calgary would play Nashville, Minnesota would play St. Louis, LA would play Edmonton. Which of those matchups, if the season were to end today, which of those matchups are you the most excited for? Because, man, Carolina-Toronto sounds like a great series.
Do I have to pick one in the East? Or can I just pick all four?
All four series are gonna be great, but man, to me, it's Carolina-Toronto.
Carolina-Toronto is intriguing. Pittsburgh Rangers is intriguing. Boston-Tampa is very intriguing. Like, I'm not trying to wipe away Florida-Washington there, but it might be the least intriguing of the four.
Fair enough.
Like, those three in the middle are outstanding. And then I go to the West. I mean, Colorado Vegas is an interesting one in the first round because of the fact that for years and years and years we said that should be the Western Conference final practically.
Right.
And now
that's assuming Vegas stays there, by the way.
Right. We need to go into the teams that aren't in that could be in because
Dallas could definitely be there.
I wouldn't even rule out Vancouver. I know it's not. I know Vancouver's got. Well, here's the reason I wouldn't rule out Vancouver. Dallas would be more in the driver's seat with the amount of games played.
Dallas is definitely in the driver's seat for that last wild card spot. Yeah.
But if Dallas falters in any way, Vancouver's right there on Vegas. And they did make the coaching change. And what happens if they creep into the playoffs?
They're a
just
problem.
What happened? Like, I wouldn't even rule out Winnipeg right now because Winnipeg's only 4 back.
Okay.
I think that's where you draw the line because I think after that, San Jose.
Yeah, it falls off a cliff. There's not enough time left.
You know what? I must say, Anaheim kind of falling out of it here is disappointing because they looked like a really fun team early in the year and they've kind of maybe
they've regressed back to where they probably should be, to be honest.
And that's probably an experience, to be honest. Like, they've got a lot of experience when it comes to goaltending.
Right.
But listen, when it came down to it, you traded Josh Manson at a time when he would have probably helped you get over the top, like if you were closer. But you're not closer, so you gotta live with that. Like, they're getting closer to being back in there, but they're not there yet. And they've got a lot of talent, and they'll be there down the road. But it's not there yet. I'm intrigued by those three teams. You know me. Now, we've done this long enough. You know me when it comes to the playoffs. I'm always a big, and this kind of doubles up on the Giroux thing, because I'm a big fan of teams that have never won before.
Okay.
When it comes, if the Flyers aren't in the playoffs, and I'm not covering what I hope is a long playoff run, which obviously, like, I mean, come on,
it ain't happening this year.
Well, those two phrases haven't fit in the same sentence in a while.
You made Game 7 against the Islanders in bubble hockey, but I understand what you're saying in general.
Well, I'm saying one time in 10 years is not exactly.
I know, but you were one period away from the Eastern Conference Finals.
But like, okay, so here's where I'm at. Like, this is where I mean when I'm like what I mean when I'm saying this. Boston Tampa Bay is an intriguing playoff series as a hockey fan, but I don't know that I want either team to win because I've seen it.
Right, they both have success in the last 10 years or so.
And here's the thing. To be honest, I'd be more okay with Boston winning than Tampa Bay because it's kind of getting old.
It's been longer, right? See, I kind of wouldn't mind Tampa winning just because 3 in a row. Come on.
I guess I'm starting to listen. If they win 3 in a row, then we know the reason why, because they've made every right decision.
I think that's why I'm so in on this Carolina-Toronto series. Because, yeah, I know Carolina's won, but they don't have any players on the roster from that team except Rod. And Toronto, obviously, we all know 1967, blah, blah, blah. That's a fun series, man. Also, just give me Freddie Anderson shutting down the Leafs in a playoff series. It's poetic if it happens.
The dream here out of that whole thing is if we get it down to Florida, Carolina. Like, make that the conference final, and I don't care who wins, because either I'm getting Florida, who's never won a cup before in their franchise history, and Claude Giroux's getting his shot, or I'm getting Carolina, and Rod Brindamore deserves one as a coach as much as he deserved one as a player.
And the NHL rejoices because you have 2 southern markets deep in the playoffs.
I kind of like that screw you aspect of that too, where it's like, who needs your major market? These are 2 of your best teams in the league right now. Deal with it.
It's going to be LA and Vegas out of the West.
I don't know about that. I mean,
if Vegas makes the playoffs, they're dangerous, man. Like, I know we talked about them potentially missing, and they're kind of in a spot where they're pretty vulnerable at the moment.
So when I look at the West, to be honest, there's not many teams out here I'm like opposed to winning in the West. It's in there right now. I mean, Colorado hasn't won since Ray Bourque. It's long overdue, and they've got a great team, and they've got a bunch of players who would have earned it.
They deserve it. They're full-blown in their Stanley Cup window.
I'm going to tell you right now, I watched the tail end of the Minnesota game last night. That team's fun.
That team's good. Yeah, and Marc-Andre Fleury changes things there.
I'd love to see it. St. Louis got theirs recently, so it's kind of less of a thing.
Yep.
I don't think St. Louis is good enough to make it that far anyway.
I agree. I think you have one of 2 teams coming out of the West, and it's Colorado or Vegas, honestly. Calgary's there, too. Never mind.
I was going to say Calgary would be a really fun one, because Calgary's another one of those teams.
They haven't won in a while either.
Calgary. Any Canadian team hasn't won in a while, so, take your pick. If right now, I mean, the shame of it is that in the East, you're going to get one representative. That's it. Toronto's it.
Right. All the eggs are in that basket.
In the West, it's probably 2.
Vancouver, Calgary.
Vancouver and Winnipeg.
Winnipeg.
Edmonton.
It's not going to be Vancouver and Winnipeg.
No, it's Calgary and Edmonton right now.
Right.
And then you might get a Vancouver or a Winnipeg to sneak in if somebody's in the right spot, at the right time. If they're in the Vegas spot, you got to. Now, do I think that team's going far? Probably not. I'm sorry, if you're Vancouver or Winnipeg and you creep into the playoffs and then get Colorado.
Well, and here's the thing. We can say probably and we'll win and blah, blah, blah. We've seen it before, man. Well, right. The playoffs are a whole different ball of wax.
Well, and if it happened in the West this year, it would be a Tampa Bay Columbus situation.
Right.
It would just be one of those. I mean, no, Colorado is not on that level. Colorado's not winning 62 games, but Colorado's going to win 50.
Colorado's good.
Well, right. Like Colorado is pretty much at this point, I would say, the odds-on favorite.
Out of the West, I would say. Yeah.
Well, out of the West, but in general, I mean, it feels like it.
It's hard to bet against the two-time champs.
It is.
I don't know how they're not your favorite. Like,
there are two teams right now that are better than they are in their own conference.
But are they better, or is Tampa Bay just pacing themselves?
Well, we'll see when the playoffs roll around. I mean,
right, because Tampa last year was a good team, but they weren't as dominant as they were, the year they lost to Columbus in the first round.
Right. I like Tampa better than Boston, and then that's where it starts to get interesting. I think Florida's more geared up for a playoff run against Tampa this time around than they were last time.
Florida is geared up.
I even think Carolina is in a position where they've made some moves where you go, they're gearing up. Every team that made a move outside of Tampa, who also made a move at the deadline.
Every team in the East added.
But every team did, because every team turned around and looked and went, we got to be ready for that. We got to be ready for that team in particular. And
it's an arms race, and Tampa's sitting at the top.
But by preparing for that team, you're preparing yourself for everybody else. If you're Carolina adding, you're not just sitting here saying, I need to compete with Tampa. I need to compete with Florida too. I need to compete with Toronto,
Carolina.
Every team felt the need to add to their roster for that reason.
Yep.
And we'll see who gets there. That's gonna be one of the best things about the playoffs, is that race is wide open because of the fact that every team is literally made a move that says going for it. The
Absolutely.
West and then the West is just wide open in general because it pretty much has been the entire season. Colorado's really good, but they're not immune to losing.
Yep. And you know what? I think that is a good place. We're going to end here with a question. Who do you think makes the playoffs in the West? What matchup are you most excited for in the East? Who do you think comes out of the East? You can tweet us at YWT Podcast. You can tweet Kevin at Kevin_Durso. While we're here, so we kind of forgot to put the ticker up today, but if you're watching on our YouTube channel, we usually have our little socials ticker going there at the bottom. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, like I just said. You can find the show anywhere you find your podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, sportstalkphilly.com. Make sure to follow them at SportsTalkPHL, at Flyerdelphia. You can find the podcast up there. Kevin usually posts it the day after we go up. And
Sports Philly, yes.
Yep. So that usually goes out on Monday morning.
I'm trying to figure out exactly, because the game is on at 6:00 tonight Eastern time.
Yep.
So maybe I'll delay the start of the release of the pod for an hour to get to 9, because the game will be over by then. You can hear us talk after the fact.
Yep. But we will be.
If you're not interested in the post game, the general usual post game stuff, you can listen to us.
Yep.
I do want to close out with the fact that since we just did all of that playoff talk and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
If you are going to tweet at us or tell us who you think is going to make the matches or whatever, you are going to get a good look between now and our next show at 3 of these teams.
Yep.
Because Sunday night is Nashville, Tuesday is Minnesota, Saturday is Toronto, and they're all going to be on display. I mean, they get more than that for the rest of the year. Who else do they play? I know they've got the Rangers twice. Washington's on the schedule. Toronto's on the schedule again. Pittsburgh's on the schedule. They might play Winnipeg in a game that Winnipeg needs. Right. That Winnipeg game matters down the stretch. For them. Well, all of those games kind of matter to me in a way, because I even sit there and go, for the last 2 games of the season where it shouldn't matter, Winnipeg might need it for a playoff spot. And if Ottawa beats you, they might pass you in the standings. Right. And for Ottawa, it could very well be draft lottery seeding. Yep. It could very well be that might be a real ugly game if both teams need a loss. Well, and for what it's worth, I say the same thing about the back-to-back against Buffalo and the game against Montreal later that week. Yep. You're down the stretch with less than 10 to go, and you play Buffalo twice, Montreal, and Ottawa. I mean, Chicago's becoming less of a factor in this because Chicago's come close enough that they're creating a cushion. You're talking games that might have some serious impact for draft lottery purposes. Yep. After the fact that you get all of these playoff teams in between just about every single game. And we are going to start turning our attention here on the show towards the future, towards the draft, towards the offseason. I know you heard a little bit of that today. And all right, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Make sure to follow us. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can search us over there, and we're trying to grow it over there. And we premiere our episodes every Sunday. So tonight at 9 for everybody who watched. Usually 8 o'clock, but
we're going to do 9 tonight just to get it past the game.
Well, and I don't even want to say like commit to anything because there are a couple more Sunday games in there. The afternoon ones will help us, but I think there's a night game in there somewhere where we'll
figure it out. Yeah.
That one might be an early premiere. I would say. You know what? Maybe that's what we'll do. The Ranger game that's at 7. That might be what I did. I did that for the Montreal game that was at 7 too, where we premiered ahead of the game. We premiered at like 5:30, 6 o'clock to get the whole episode in before the game started. We'll probably do that next week, and then from there it's the usual 8 o'clock premieres because you got a couple of games that are early enough for that. You've got off days. It's good stuff. But we're here for the rest of the year for you, and then playoff time.
And then we'll be back. Yep, we're only a couple of weeks out from playoffs. I'm starting to get excited. So until then, we'll be back next week, and we'll see you.